Let us begin. The Real Cost of a Merry Christmas by Azo Nightwolf. 3,496 words. Content warning. Some gore. The night sky is clear and the streets are silent. Everyone tucked away so late on Christmas Eve. There's not even a moon to light the way for Jacob. Just a bone-deep chill weighing him down, soaking his fraying hoodie and seeping deep into his skin. He's not shivering. Not yet, at least. He's quite fond of this ravenous cold, the type that swallows him whole until he can feel nothing else. Jacob's bloodied knuckles barely sting where he's shoved them hard into his large front pocket to keep warm. It's all numb, including his heavily bruised jaw and the gnawing hunger. There's a $50 note clutched in his fist, the payment for tonight's job, smashing a parked car's window as a threat to a new gang. The adrenaline had kept him warm then, while the shared grins and bright eyes on his friends' faces had kept him content. Jacob offered to swipe a six-pack after. He had actually been happy enough to pay with his 50 and fake ID, even if it meant he skipped eating tomorrow. But they left to go home, because the holidays are for family, no matter how ruined, and now Jacob walks to nowhere. The street is too pretty to have bars on its windows. He passes dim shop fronts strung with dazzlingly bright baubles that he can see his reflection in, and lush garlands that might even be real plants. The next door has a mannequin with a thick red leather jacket advertised as made from real reindeer. They dress their dolls better than Jacob can dress himself. He rolls his eyes at the morose thoughts. Sure, his jeans are worn almost completely through at the knees, and he's bringing in yet another Christmas alone, hungry and homeless. The very least he can do is not be pathetic about it. The glamorous storefronts end abruptly where glamorous homes start. Surely at least one family is off on a holiday, and Jacob can couch surf in an empty house, bathing in luxury and warmth until he needs to skitter away like a rat at the first hint of a car pulling into the driveway. He canvasses one block, then another, and plans to circle the whole neighborhood until he finds something dark and tucked away. He can see into windows, TVs bigger than doors playing carols, late-night hot chocolate while cuddled up on a couch that isn't even sagging in the middle, or parents sneaking presents under the trees. Jacob stares, for too long sometimes, and gorges himself until he just feels sick. He hooks left at the next turn and comes upon high wooden walls with a letterbox overflowing. There are no sharp points or barbed wire at the top, so Jacob leaps for it with confidence and catches his fingers over the fence, vaulting it easily. He lands on the plush grass of the backyard, and it absorbs his impact better than any mattress he's had. Jacob feels good. He feels strong in a place like this. No wonder rich people walk around with a swagger. If they only know a world that's built for the soft and weak like them. His knuckles have started bleeding again, but he's too numb from the cold to feel the pain. The backyard is wide and trimmed, with little Christmas elves in their curled shoes dotted around the mulched flower beds. They have a life-size sleigh sitting right in the middle of the grass, with a giant sack on the back, and a burst of anger chases the cold out of his chest for a brief moment. How much did a thing like that cost? Jacob could have eaten like a king. He could be wearing a jacket made of reindeer leather, instead of feeling frost creep over his shoulders like the grip of death itself. Jacob darts a glance past the sleigh to the back of the house and its massive windows. It's dark, with only the breathing pulse of Christmas tree lights. There are no presents under the tree, and everything is packed away in a I get a cleaner 3 times a week tidy, so that's another check mark for a possible vacation. Jacob should case the house properly, get somewhere warm, and finally sleep. But the more he looks at the sleigh, the more pissed off he gets. He strides across the grass towards it, jaw clenched, ready to do something. Kick the cheap plastic over like a child, throw the hollow presents around. He only snaps out of it when something moves at the edge of his vision, too close. Jacob whips around and goes low, eyes scanning the house windows again, and checks above the fence line, then darts to every dark corner in case of cameras. Nothing. His gaze trails down and lands on imprints in the grass in front of the sleigh, like it's being crushed by dozens of hoofprints trailing across the backyard. Some people get a bit too into decorating. Get a hobby, Jacob mutters in annoyance as he turns away. He reaches for the swooping sleigh edge and grabs hold, lifting a knee high to step into it. It feels solid under his grip, like real wood, the dense stuff that reminds him of a good cricket bat when he's got a collateral damage kind of job. The thick velvet zack looks real too, with all the right kinds of stiffness and the way it shines under the dim streetlight passes over the fence. The presents spilling out of the top don't have the same fake, stiff gleam that mall Santas do, with so much detail and care in the wrapping. Jacob grabs the full sack's edge, and the first present he pulls out is fist-sized, but dense. He doesn't rattle when shaken. It's not just a rock to weigh it down. Are they real? Jacob swallows thickly. He shoves that small one into his pocket and goes back for more, clumsy in his rush, and presents spill out at his feet. He goes for small but heavy. Those are usually expensive, and he can fit more in his pockets. If he's lucky, it'll be watches, maybe, or jewelry. He stuffs them into his large hoodie pocket, into the front and back pockets on his jeans, one into his waistband, more under his shirt, and he tucks the hem into his pants to keep everything in, so he starts looking like Santa after a hefty meal. It doesn't matter how many he pulls out. The sack seems endless. This neighborhood is good, but not millionaire good. What kind of idiot puts out their presents like this? There's a flicker, and Jacob startles hard, crouching low in the high edges of the sleigh and squinting across the backyard's darkness to the building. There's nothing, so it must be the decorations again. Jacob peers over the front of the sleigh and sees the hoof imprints moving, like the deer impatient. Reindeer, that is, if this is Santa's sleigh. Jacob grabs one last big present with his arms barely fitting around the sides and steps down into the grass, slowly moving towards the invisible steps. He'll admit, it's some pretty fancy tech, but it's nothing new. Jacob has seen cheery plastic Santas going down chimneys, up windows, or flying over roofs in various cartoonish vehicles. 'Tis the season for spending. As Jacob steps closer, the imprints almost shy away. He swipes a foot towards one, guessing it may be clear plastic that he just can't see in this dark... He kicks something solid. An invisible leg. What? A blow strikes the large present, tearing wrapping paper and cratering the cardboard, ramming straight through and into Jacob's chest with all the force of a baseball bat. He's thrown back, feet ripped off the ground, and lands, already winded, head slamming down onto hard ground. Jacob gasps and forces himself to roll over slippery ice, expecting another hit. He ditches the large present, several more falling out from under his shirt, scrambling on hands and knees to where? The cavernous room is bigger than any run-down high school he's ever attended, lit with hundreds of flickering wall-mounted torches that make the hazy ice glitter and bleed water that refreezes as mounds below. Yeah, it all looks hazy to Jacob. He winces as vertigo threatens to send him toppling, despite being so grounded that the ice under him burns. It's the very air that's tricking his eyes, cracked like a window, fractured into thousands of pieces, warping the entire room through ever more distorted lenses. When his eyes finally focus, he realizes it's not the torches flickering. Each fracture stutters between the cavern and somewhere else. They show city streets, a beach somewhere raining hard enough it can't be seen, like thumbing so fast through a picture book that it's all just color. When Jacob has hesitated, almost belly flat on the ground, is just low enough that he can peer through the bottom lip of one shattered piece of air right in front of him. Through this fractures of forest, dark and dense, with trees thicker and taller than he's ever seen in real life. His eyes hurt when he tries to focus through the warp and the flickering, but he thinks he can make out a Santa plushie and his sleigh half buried in the shrubbery. He slowly reaches up towards the fracture and can almost feel the humid air of a rainforest against his hand like quiet huffs of breath. It's so warm. A sharp pain lances through Jacob's hand and he rips it back with a strangled cry. His last 3 fingers are bleeding, missing the very tips in a perfect line where they had passed through before the image snapped away. Jacob stares in horror as the blood trails down his fingers and drips onto the ground. "Wake up," Jacob gasps. "Wake up, man. You're probably freezing to death somewhere." His hand is shaking now from the fear. He stays low and pulls his limbs in, eyes straining to see around him without moving too far and getting cut to ribbons. Jacob scrambles in a pocket and yanks out his balaclava to wrap his bleeding fingers, biting back a scream as it presses deep. Can hallucinations hurt this much? Jacob keeps as flat as he can, pulling and shoving at presents in his shirt and hoodie pocket to get lower under the fractures as he armory crawls to the nearest wall. Some fall out, leaving a trail like a bleeding deer being run down. It hurts just as much. Is that one expensive? Could this one make next Christmas be hot chocolate on the couch, listening to shitty carols and ripping into expensive wrapping paper? The panic starts feeling a lot like anger. Jacob adapts. He always does. The bottom edge of the fractures becomes clearer, even if they remain just as headache-inducing. He moves faster and grabs presents when they fall out to tuck them back in. When he hears slow, lumbering footsteps, he goes immediately still, but it's with his good hand tucked into the pocket with his knife. The air is too thick with fractures to see more than a faint shadow. Jacob has to press his cheek right to the hard scrapes in the ice to see underneath it all. Feet, frostbite blue and black, with toes crushed together and broken, wrenched upwards and back again in a sickening curl. It toes along a red velvet sack heavy enough to dig furrows into the ice, and peeking out is the glitter of wrapping paper with perfect curly bows. The sack is hauled to the edge and left to slump there. The feet leave with a stumbling, dragging gait. Jacob darts a glance to the wall he is heading towards. It's close, since he appeared towards the edge of the room. He turns and starts crawling towards the velvet sack. This is payment. This is what he's owed for putting up with this insanity. The room blazes red like the spark of a meteor hitting atmosphere, and Jacob snaps his eyes shut. He sees it behind his eyelids long after the dim torchlight returns almost instantly. He's left blinking, dazed. The sack is gone. Maybe it's the starburst in his vision, but the cavern is also less hazy, with fewer flickering places, and he can see the outline of the tunnel the feet came from. He thinks some fractures have disappeared. Closed? What now? Jacob hisses in annoyance. He presses the knuckles of his balaclava-wrapped fingers to his forehead and tries to rub out the headache. Jacob crawls the rest of the way to the wall, back against it as he slides up, then shuffles sideways towards the tunnel. He stumbles over stalagmites of ice, wincing under every fire as he feels painfully cold water drip down and soak his clothes. He loses more presence in the narrow sections, but grabs a torch and holds it too close, fire licking at his hair, heat on his shivering skin. When Jacob reaches the hallway, he double-checks the fractures don't extend beyond the cavern, and cautiously slinks out into open space. He stares down at where the velvet sack used to be, then pulls out a thin present from his hoodie pocket. This place is dangerous, but is it worth the risk? Jacob turns and frisbees it through into the cavern, where it flops to the ground, split in a perfect half. The other side sits pretty on the bright cobblestone road near a lush farm. The present was a wallet of dark leather and a shiny metal-embossed logo, the kind people would pay good money for, even if it was a fake. He repacks his remaining presents better now that he has the space to move, feeling it weigh him down and bulk out his pockets, but it's worth it. It'll all be worth it. Jacob walks carefully through the wide tunnel. Not far in, the ground rises in a steep slope with steps worn into it along one side. Does the sleigh launch from here? Or is he just going crazy? He keeps low as he reaches the plateau and gets back on his stomach to peer over the edge into another cavern. It's far taller, with many thick pillars holding up a jagged ceiling and dozens of tunnels branching off every side. In the dead center, under the lowest stalactite of ice, is the blaze of a bonfire 2 stories tall, and wrapping around the edge is a river of water running in circles despite the perfectly flat ground. More of the creatures, 20, 30, stagger around the fire or cluster around the tunnel entrances. One shovels in crumpled paper, colorful wobbly crayon letters to Santa, into the fire, and it roars with a cacophony of voices, all wishing, all hoping, all greedy. It layers like a chant and warbles like they're drowning deep below the surface. Another creature in a long line of them plunges its hands into fire up to the shoulders, almost fully consumed. The flames burn it, flesh melting like the ice walls, and it reemerges, holding a perfectly pristine present, like the bonfire itself wrapped the thing. The creature walks towards a tunnel, and its limbs reform, even more mutilated, the drips landing on the feet and solidifying curled. It tucks the present into a red velvet sack and returns to wait in line. Jacob crawls up the plateau and keeps to the shadows as he slides behind a wide pillar to get closer. He can't take his eyes off it. Small presents come out, or larger ones, some oddly shaped. Jacob scrambles under his shirts to pull out the first present he touches and digs nails into the thick wrapping paper. He fumbles it one-handed and drops the balaclava to tear in with both hands until he hits the plush silk of a box. Jacob wrenches it open and bleeds over a necklace with glittering pearls. It's the sign of a pending miracle, or an omen of death. It's worth it. He swallows thickly and looks back at the flames. The creatures are looking back, searching blindly with melt-scarred faces. Jacob lurches further behind the pillar to hide, pearls rattling in his shaking hand. The elves start to move around, sniffing deeply with gurgling grunts. They haven't pinpointed him yet, but they're slowly moving closer. Jacob clenches his jaw so hard it aches. He snatches up the wrapping paper and pins it to his thigh, swapping between his bloody fingers to scribble out his wish for $1 million. A pair of lumbering footsteps begin to circle the pillar, and Jacob hurls the necklace in the opposite direction, where it clatters and skitters across the ice. The creatures dive for it, hitting the ground with heavy thumps or slamming shoulders and tearing into each other to get closer. One drops and sinks a mouthful of fangs into the ice, swallowing the smear of blood left behind. Jacob lunges out from behind the pillar, only to skid to a halt when 3 more block his path, their nostrils flared. He ducks a wild swipe for his head and tries to dodge around, but his feet go out from under him and he slams his knees hard enough that pain rattles up his bones, watching his path to the bonfire close as more creatures stampede towards him. "Fuck!" Jacob screams in rage. He hurls himself back with another swipe, sliding across the ground until he can scramble back up and sprint for his tunnel. He throws aside the crumpled, bloody letter to Santa, and they lunge for it. He kicks the soaked balaclava, and more of them give chase. Jacob hits the top of the slope, running and leaps, feeling a spike of fear as fingers scrape against the back of his hoodie, feeling a familiar, wretched despair as more presents fall. He sails through the air over the steep slope, arms tucking in, legs extending, and lands with a quick roll before launching himself down the tunnel from a sprinter's start. Heavy bodies throw themselves down the slope, and thundering steps follow behind. Jacob bursts into his cavern, and there are far fewer fractures, but they blur and flicker, and he doesn't trust his eyes. Jacob drops, sliding wildly, feet first, under all the fractures. He sheds more presents, but he can see the pile he left when he entered still waiting for him. It's okay. It's okay. The first creature hurtles into the cavern and splits cleanly down the middle, and the remaining side splattering over the ground. Jacob rolls as soon as his momentum slows, and frantically army crawls the rest of the way, as fast as the nauseous drumbeat of his heart allows. The room flares red, and with his eyes squeezed shut, he only knows he's reached his fracture when his hand knocks a present across the ice. He fumbles for it, blinking rapidly, and looks backwards. A dozen creatures have made it into the cavern, and with another set of fractures closed, 4 remain charging towards him, only seconds away. And Jacob's head snaps around, and he can't see the same fracture. No big backyard, no dim living room with a Christmas tree. But to his left is a clear night and the familiar graffiti of his gang that should have been 2 hours away. Broken pavement, bars decorating shop fronts, and a cracked plastic sleigh crammed into an overflowing bin with a shadow of hooves down an alleyway. Jacob's bloody fingers brush the corner of soft, silky wrapping paper, but a shadow falls over him, the ground shaking with the stomping footfalls, and he panics, hurling himself to the side and into the fracture. He lands with a dizzy tumble over cigarette butts and a shattered beer bottle before he lurches back up, only to flinch at the flare of a sadly strobing string of red Christmas lights dangling from a streetlight in the shape of a noose. Jacob stands on a familiar, quiet street, shivering. There's nothing under his shirt. There's nothing but a 50 and a knife in his pocket. His fingers are bleeding, his knees hurt, and he might have wrenched his shoulder at some point. Shadow foos are gone. Jacob takes a few staggering steps down the road and thinks he might be in shock. His breath puffs out fog since it's gotten colder. The next exhale is heavier, and his third is a desperate scream as he turns and dives back into the fracture. But he lands on his hands and knees on the same cracked pavement, finally ripping open the knee of his threadbare jeans. It closed. He lost his chance. Jacob slams his forehead down onto the sidewalk and sobs with great heaving gasps, clawing up dirt and dust. He's just so cold. Throw up those moths and monsters. Cheer for the story if you loved it. That's a longer story. I feel like we need longer claps than that. Alrighty, Rue. You guys feel free to share your thoughts, praise, and critique of the story. I do have some comments. I don't know if I'll go over all of them, but I'll try and at least talk about like general impressions of the story and stuff like that. Alrighty, Rue. Oh yeah, Rianka's in the back again. I didn't even realize that poor Riank might not be awake for his story. Alrighty, Rue. Well, let's just get into it. Very, very spooky little horror Christmas story. Very interesting. So my biggest praise for this story is the beginning. I think the way that you guys, I don't know which of you wrote what, so I'm just probably gonna just say you guys for the whole thing. But if you want to share more about, if you're here, I don't know if they are, but if you want to share more about who wrote what and why, feel free to. Because you're across the pond, right? And so it's Azo and Nightwolf, and then Stardust Bear, and then you and Death's Head. So your story is in the general time again, and you've mentioned before, I thought, that you weren't able to stay awake during that time slot sometimes. But anyway, so yeah, my biggest praise for the story is this opener. I think you do an awesome job setting up the story, and I was so into it. And I think it's cool because like we talk about in the short stories that you can only have like 3 characters, right? If you go more than that, you run the risk of being confusing. And I do think we see quite a few with like a single character. But with something like this, generally you're probably going to have more. And you can have like 5 or 6 or whatever and introduce them all and have it all make sense. And I don't know that if you even like set out to be like, we are going to write a story about a single character. But I think it worked really well. It felt like I really got to know this character and get really interested in him and his journey and his personality. And so I think that was a cool move. The beginning was both of us. Gotcha. No problem, I can stay awake. What was I gonna say? Oh, so something I do want to ask you guys is that folks were talking about Jacob's character, and that like one of the comments was saying, hey, like, once I'm in a horror dimension, I'm worried about the horror dimension. I'm worried about survival. I'm not going to care about the presence at that point. Honestly, for me, like, I can totally get that critique, but at the same time, it kind of worked for me because the presents are survival to somebody who's homeless. That, as I was understanding it as, like, that, there's, like, a line in there of, would this present be the difference between, like, having a nice Christmas with, like, expensive wrapping paper on the couch and stuff like that. And so I was kind of understanding it as, like, yes, he wants to survive, But even if he just gets like one of these presents, he just gets like the pearl necklace, that might set him up, you know, for the future, and have him not be on the streets in the future. And so I kind of understood why he was so focused on the presents, but I can also understand the critique of, like, it seems a little weird that he's so focused on the presents rather than, forget about the presents, I need to get out of here. So I'm really curious what you guys on the chat, in the chat, thought of that part. Were you with me? Were you with the commenter? What'd you think? Also, Nightwolf, since you're here, if you have any questions about your story, anything you want me or the chat to answer, feel free to put them in the chat. So yeah, but going back to the beginning. So I really love how you set everything up. I'm curious why he likes this kind of cold. I feel like it would really suck if you don't have a nice warm house to live in. But nonetheless, I do really like the way you describe the ravenous cold. I think that's great. I guess maybe the point is, like, it's so cold I can't feel anything, and maybe that's why he likes it. It's sad, though. I like, you know, the adrenaline kept him warm. That's a neat little setup for what's going on. I'm a little torn on if the friends need to be mentioned, because, like, they don't show up at all in the story, and so it does feel a little weird to introduce the friends only for them not really to have any importance. But then again, at the end, when he does see through the fracture, oh hey, I noticed my friend's graffiti. It does kind of tie together, so a little torn on that one. I do like the holidays are for family no matter how ruined. It's neat. And this is neat as well. I'm not sure. There was like... It might be later. Oh yeah, I do think it's interesting the phrasing of, like, him gorging himself on, like, jealousy on the beautiful sights. That's really interesting. There's, like, a line about, like, they dress their dolls better than he can dress himself. I really like that line as well. And this is neat too. I do wonder why he, like, does the trespassing and then looks for the cameras after that. That felt a little bit odd, but forgivable. I really like, I get a cleaner 3 times a week tidy. That's great. And then I love how you set up the sleigh and how it's like, oh yeah, like that would make sense for rich people or even not super rich people to just have like a sleigh decoration. And I think it's so cool how he goes up to it and is like, yeah, here's some fake presents. And then he's like, that doesn't feel fake. And then he gets in the sleigh, it feels like actual wood. There's invisible reindeer, like, leaving hoof prints. Like, I've seen this tech before. Like, I love all the little clues that you're bringing us along. Like, wait, no, there are a lot of reasons why this could be fake, but here's your evidence that actually it's real this time. I think that's great. And then it totally makes sense, especially at the beginning of him taking the presents. It's like, these feel real. Let's take them. I do feel like it would make a little more sense if he opened one, because, like, they could be fake but heavy. And so I do feel like him opening one and being like, whoa, actually, yes. Actually, this is real. Rather than just going by feel. But nonetheless, I do still really like that. It is the season for spending, it's true. And then I do like that he's, I did feel like this kind of reads like he's realizing this is Santa's sleigh for real. And so it doesn't, but as the story continues, it doesn't seem like he's connected that. And so I do feel like taking this line out might have been better. I do like, you know, him going around and he ends up kicking the reindeer. That was neat. And the reindeer kicking him back. That works quite well. So my first and one of my biggest critiques for the story is simply how the horror world is introduced. The first time I read it, I was very confused because there's not much of a transition. I understood the second time, it's like, oh, okay, so the reindeer kicked him into the cavernous room, and he's just like, well, I'm here now, you know? But especially saying the word the is adds to the issue because the refers back to something we've already established. But this hasn't been established, and so I'm left going, the cavernous room. Wait, you didn't tell me about a cavernous room. And so even just changing that to a cavernous room actually would help. I'm not sure it would be enough to fix the confusion with that part. I do feel like we need kind of like he feels ice underneath him, and he's like, wow, why do I feel ice? I was in a snowy backyard or a grassy backyard. Oh yeah, he could have seen he could have seen a fracture in the yard and been like, huh, like, are my eyes playing tricks on me? That looks weird. And maybe he could even see the cavernous room through the fracture or something. But even something as simple as like, suddenly he's in a cavernous room. Like, usually I say to take out like the word suddenly, but I think in this case, even just saying suddenly he's in a cavernous room, we're like, ah, yes, this is sudden. that would work perfectly fine, rather than it kind of reading like you've established the room when you haven't. I am wondering why the reindeer are invisible and nothing else is. It feels odd to have a sleigh and presents that are perfectly visible and reindeer that are invisible. It feels like if that's the defense you're going for, you make everything invisible. And then I think the fractures are introduced a bit better than the room itself is, but I also feel like they could have a little bit more of an introduction, a bit more of a transition as well. Because how it's just introduced that the air is tricking his eyes. So it's like cracked like a window, fractured into 1,000 pieces. And so it seems like a quality to the air, not noun fracture. Like, noun, there are a bunch of fractures. Rather, it seems like, oh, it just looks kind of fractured. Like, it's just a look to the air, if that makes sense. And so then when we go down to each fracture, it's kind of like, wait, what do you mean each fracture? The fractures weren't really established. It was just established that the air looks kind of funky. And so I do think going more into that and going, you know, the air, at the very least, like, the air is full of fractures. They look like, you know, and then what they look like, you know, they look like a diamond hole in the air, or they look like a crack, like a, I'm just thinking of Doctor Who now. They look like a crack in a window or something like that. Though I don't know how you could look through that if it looked like that. So establishing that a little bit more would have been good, but I do really like this idea of the fractures in general. I think that's a neat idea for how Santa gets around, that he has these spooky portals, spooky finger mutilating portals that fracture the air in his lair. I think that works quite well. I am wondering why Santa would be in a rainforest, and there are people who live in a rainforest, and so I presume that it's just somebody lives there and Santa went to give them a present. But this whole thing is just described as forest, dark and dense with trees, and Santa plushie and a sleigh half buried in the shrubbery. There's no house, there's no smoke coming out of a chimney, there's no hut on the river. Nothing like that. And so it just kind of seems like Santa is out delivering presents to the jaguars in the forest. And so it seems a little weird. So I do think that either just using a more urban area or saying that there's a house there would be good. Well, my necklace has decided to fully break now. I'm sorry, Christmas light necklace. You were a good one. So the finger thing is really interesting. On the one hand, I think it adds stakes and drama that we know, oh, the fractures, like, they can really do some damage. And they actually do a good job of setting up, it's gonna get more horrific than this. And so it's like, hey, this ain't no happy, cute Christmas world. This is a scary, spooky horror Christmas world where your fingers can get chopped off. So I think it works well in that sense. But it does feel a little odd that, like, him bleeding out all over the ground is not mentioned, that he kind of just keeps going. And granted, like, it's one of those things where it's like, can't focus on this right now. I need to get out of here. But especially because he is focused so much on the presents and not just on, I need to get out of here, it does feel like we kind of move on from the fingers being chopped off a little bit fast. And the other thing about it is that he is able to go through a portal at the end no problem, and nothing gets cut off. And so it does feel a little odd to set up such stakes and then have them not really come back around, especially when the elf gets chopped in half, just like sliding through the cavern. And so I'm a little torn on the finger thing. I think it kind of works, but kind of doesn't. I really like this line. This works very well. This very much feels like how somebody would be thinking at that point, of like, you're not in this weird, horrifying Santa dimension. You're probably just freezing to death and hallucinating, man. Works very well. I do like the can hallucinations hurt this much. I do like the drama of him army crawling everywhere, trying to get underneath the fractures. I think that works well. Oh yeah, I think, yeah, this is the line I was talking about before, of why I was kind of understanding why he was focused on the presents. I do like the panic starts feeling a lot like anger. That's neat. He adapts. He always does. That's great too. I do feel like introducing, unless I missed it, I feel like introducing the headache-inducing quality earlier would be good. Because as is, I think this is the first time you mention that they're headache-inducing, and so saying just as headache-inducing, I'm like, wait, just as. But nothing was headache-inducing before. So I think saying, like, it hurts his head to look at the fractures earlier, again, unless you already did and I missed it, would be good. I assume this is Santa. Nice and terrifying and horror-y image for his feet. I'm wondering why there are basically 3 sacks. There's a sack in the yard. There's this one, and then at the end, when they come out of the fire, he puts it in a red velvet sack. So I don't know if it's just that Santa has a bunch of sacks. Could make sense if so. But especially because usually Santa's portrayed as just having one giant one. It did throw me a little bit that there are 3. I do wish he'd got to meet Santa, if that is Santa. Trying to figure out if I want to talk more about that now or later. But yeah, I guess just first blush, I wish he'd gotten to meet him. Even if he was horrifying. I do like that, this establishment of they'd pay good money for it even if it was fake, and so it's like he's still holding out that it could be fake, but he's like people would still pay good money for it. That works very well. I do like this weird, spooky letter to Santa thing. I think that's a really interesting idea of like they put the letter to Santa in, the fire makes the present, and then they have to like reach their hands in to grab it. That is really interesting. I am wondering if this was meant to be objective or more of a character thing, because I assume it's just kids being kids, you know, and wanting presents. And so, not necessarily being greedy, they just are kids who want presents, you know. But it could make sense that that is how Jacob views them, that he's out here with nothing, and so to him, even innocent kids just asking for presents ends up sounding like rich kids being greedy to him. So it actually was here that they were introduced. So similar issue here, more of the creatures. This is the very first line that the creatures ever get introduced in. And so it feels very odd to introduce the creatures by saying more of the creatures, because it's like, wait, what do you mean more? There was never one. You never told us that there was one. So I feel like the creatures also needed to be introduced more. They are physically not described. I have no idea what to imagine. I was imagining, I've been watching the Owl House, and I was imagining the, like, detention guys, from Owl House. But yeah, so introducing them, more, I think would be good. Definitely horrifying how, like, their elf feet become elf feet because they're like mutilated and curled that way. I think I might come back to that comment. I am wondering why Jacob opens one of the presents and throws the pearl necklace. I'm guessing it was meant to be like as a distraction, but the elves didn't seem to notice him before, and so it kind of seemed like he was fine to just slink his way away, you know, without having to throw one of his presents away. And so, especially because it wasn't established that he's like trying to do a distraction, I did get quite confused when he opens it and throws it. I did like the way you introduced them as elves. That works well. And then it did, like, again, there is this question of would he be doing this when he should be focusing on survival. But I do kind of like that he's like, hey, if this is how we get presents, is with this fire, I'm going to ask for $1 million. Like that, that works well. It's like, it's worth a shot. And then I do like how he sees not the fracture with the backyard, but one with the graffiti of his gang. I think that works pretty well. I like the cigarettes and shattered beer bottles, very atmospheric. Let's see, do I want to talk about this now or at the end? I guess I'll talk about it now. The noose thing, though, feels oddly and needlessly dark. It might work in the weird horror world. Come back to that, though. It might not. But in our world, it's like, why the needless darkness? You know, why would there be Christmas lights in the shape of a noose. And I feel like the problem is there's a couple of different options because I thought that it's implying that one of his friends hung himself. That one of his friends hung himself earlier that night. I see the ad coming. I guess we can let it go through. And yes, I did read a couple to my dad today as well, or yesterday. My dad was thinking that it was Santa leaving it as like a message to Jacob of like, don't come back kind of thing. And then another friend of mine thought that it was not actually like a noose, just like he's kind of freaking out. that Jacob's freaking out, and so all it is just a loop, and he's like, that is the shape of a noose. I think the last one makes the most sense. My issue is just that a noose is a very specific thing. I don't know if I could make it out of my little necklace here. But yeah, actually I can. Yeah. Oh, you can't see it that well actually. But it's like, okay, well now that I'm doing this, it does actually make more sense to happen naturally. But, you know, I was thinking of a noose that's made out of rope that has, like, the thing at the bottom with the rope all wrapped around and stuff like that. That I was like, that's highly specific, and I don't feel like the lights could do that on their own. And so I was like, this has to be actually made. Like, somebody actually made it that way. But now that I did that, maybe it doesn't have to be done that intentionally. But basically, it's just highly specific, so I thought it had to be made, and it feels oddly and needlessly dark for our world. Now, granted, if you did intend it as just, that's what it looks like to Jacob, because he's kind of freaking out, that kind of works, and I guess we'll come back to this. We'll come back to the Christmas light nooses after the ad.
Hello, kitty. Oh, sneeze. Oh, sneeze, sneeze. You're cute. Yeah, you're very cute. Yes. Yes, yes. Hello.
Well, I don't know if we still have time, but if you want to do a story, we will sometimes do stories during the ads of like I say a word and you say a word. I guess we could start with Christmas. Hello, Norman.
Oh, boops. I got booped by my kitty. Could you see that? I got booped. She's like, nope. Yes, baby.
Christmas adverts? Or were you continuing the story or just saying adverts?
Yeah, the kitty. Yes, baby. Oh, so cute. Yes, a sweet love. That's a sweet kitty love, yes. Yes, yes.
Alright. I want to see if I can find... Okay, I could find it. Prepare for horror, but I was saying that I was imagining the elves as the detention guys from Owl House. Here you go. Here you go. That's what I was imagining. No, I put a GIF in the writing group chat. Mako just clocked out of work. Nice. But anywho, back to the story. Okay. So, as for some more overall, stuff. So the next part that I'm going to talk about, I've talked about before how sometimes writers will critique you based on how they would have written the story. That doesn't mean that it's how you did or should write the story. And so this might be one of those critiques, but I feel like it'd be interesting to discuss and hear what folks in the chat think and everything. So, like I said, I absolutely love the beginning. I think you set it up so well. I was so into it. I was really empathizing with the character, and I was like, oh, like this is the story of a homeless person finding the real Santa. Like, how interesting is that? And also I did not see the content warning. But I was thinking that this had the makings of a really meaningful story, that you could really tell something super transcendent that would really stick with your readers for years to come with that kind of premise. And I think that it's possible that all you guys wanted to do was just create a Christmas horror story. And if that was the only intention, I do think that you accomplished that. I do have other stuff I want to discuss with that, but this definitely works as a Christmas horror story. It has the vibes. I'm going to remember those vibes, and it works for that. However, I'm not walking away from the story with a lot of meaning and feeling like, wow, like that story really hit me and really got me. I'm kind of just walking away going, well, that was sad and spooky. And again, if that was how you wanted readers to be left, then that works fine. But what I'm wondering is, knowing that you had this premise that you could use to make something so deeply meaningful that could really impact your readers' lives, I'm wondering what made you go the direction that you went with it. What made you decide to go in the horror direction? And what you have is not bad. What you have works, again, especially if it was just your intention to spook your readers a bit. But I do... But I'm wondering what made you go for that instead of going for something that could really, like, touch your readers' hearts and stuff like that. You know what I mean? I don't know if I'm making sense with that. But another thing to discuss with the horror is that, how did I phrase it in my comment? So, you can have a story where it's like, okay, we're going to explain how Santa works, but the explanation will be horrifying. You know, it's going to be Santa, but it's going to be, you know... It's gonna be, everything that you know and love about Santa, now you're gonna know and be horrified about, because the real explanation is something horrifying. You can totally do that, and that totally works, and that seems kind of like the sort of thing that you're going for. But I feel like it doesn't quite get there for me, because it doesn't feel like it's answering my questions about Christmas in a horrifying way. It feels like it's creating more questions about the explanation, more questions about the story. Like the idea that the way that the Christmas presents get created is because there's this magical fire, and you put the Santa letter in it, and then you get the present out. Like, that's interesting. But I'm kind of left going, okay, why do the elves need to mutilate themselves for the presents? Why does it work like this? You know, why do they have to mutilate themselves? It just kind of seems like it's there to be horrifying, right? It's there, and it is horrifying. But I feel like you could go for that kind of thing and have it be horrifying, but also have it explain things, right? I'm trying to think. I wish I thought of examples yesterday. Let's see if I can think of something. I don't know, like, this is not great, but, you know, like with the reindeer flying, like, maybe the way that they fly, it, like, completely mutilates their bodies, and, like, I don't know, their legs go back and turn into wings or something like that. Like, that works because, it's, like, we have the story of reindeer flying, and all you're doing is explaining they fly, but it's kind of horrifying. You know, they fly, but the way that happens is not cute little pixie dust. It's, you know, by their bodies being mutilated. You know, that works quite well. But just kind of going, okay, the elves just keep on mutilating themselves to get the presents. I'm kind of going, but why though? What does the mutilation serve in canon? Like, diegetically, why is there horror? You know, why is this happening in this way? Why does this work where less horrific methods maybe wouldn't work, that kind of thing. I don't know if I'm making sense in that. Kind of similar to my milder question of, like, okay, if the reindeer are invisible, why isn't the sleigh invisible? It's like that kind of thing where it's like, okay, that's cool of the reindeer being invisible, and that totally makes sense as an explanation for why people don't see them. But then it's like, okay, but then why isn't the sleigh also invisible? That doesn't quite connect. You know what I mean? You now know how reindeer fly, and you wish you didn't, exactly. The letters into the fire that makes the presents is a pretty cool idea, indeed. Nightwolf said, you'll have to ask Azo for that one towards the end. Azo took over because I was busy with uni stuff. Gotcha. Hello, the Shadow Legion. Maybe the elves just load up sacks to pass on to Santa, so there's a bunch of sacks. Mm-hmm. Treasure means nothing if you don't live to spend it, regarding Jacob going after the treasure. True. Maybe it's showing the background of where he came from. You mean the presents and stuff? Nightwolf said the beginning was both of us. Navin says, the beginning is the best part of the story, but I feel like the story switches focus right in the middle, which is a little confusing. Yep, I would agree with that. So let me think if I summarize it. Oh yeah, so I was gonna say something about Santa. Like, that could have been something that could have maybe wrapped it all up. That either, like, we meet Santa and Santa's actually nice. Oh yeah, that was the other thing I was gonna talk about. Another thing I was gonna talk about is, well, all this is horrifying, but what they're doing is bringing presents to children. And I think that's part of why I even more have that question of, like, okay, like, yeah, like, I can get behind a story whose premise is explaining how Santa works, but in a horrifying way. Like, I can get behind that. But at the end of the day, unless you're going a Krampus route, and it's about Krampus, you know, stealing the naughty kids away, what Santa's doing is inherently good. And so it does feel odd that it's like, okay, so, well, A, why does it have to be, you know, so horrifying to get the presents to the kids? And B, they can't be that evil if that's their goal. If their goal is to spread joy to children, as horrifying as the elves might look, as horrifying as what's going on might be, they can't be totally evil. And so, and so that's another thing too. And so that could have been a thing that you could have used Santa for, that maybe, like, Santa looks horrifying, but he's like, oh, hey, bud, like, you want a present? You know, he's still actually a nice guy. Or you could have had him meet him and he could have been horrifying, and that would have just been, like, the climax, the boss battle. That could have worked as well. Santa being utterly terrifying but caring and gentle would have been really cool, indeed. And I'm guessing that the title of, like, the real cost of A Merry Christmas might have to do with, like, the whole mutilation stuff, where it's like, oh, the elves literally sacrifice their bodies to get presents to the kids. Which is something. That is quite the idea, if that was what you were going for. But yeah, I was just kind of left with, but why though? but why all this horror? Why must it be in that way, you know? Let me see if there's anything else I wanted to talk about. Oh, yeah. Kind of going back to, like, you could have had a lot more meaning than just the horror. That kind of goes along with the ending as well, because, well, so to start with the title. So the title is The Real Cost of a Merry Christmas, and the only explanation I can think is that it's the cost to the elves. But if it's the cost to Jacob, well, Jacob doesn't get a Merry Christmas at all. Like, Jacob gets a Christmas alone and sad. And so, just lost my train of thought. Oh, and so you could have had him keep, like, a single present or something like that. So the ending is really just, like, sad, and he leaves with nothing, and he's just cold. And I do like that last line of he's just so cold. I think that is, like, that does work as this sad, tragic, empty ending. But again, I'm kind of wondering, but why though? But why does it have to end, so sad and empty? Especially if, again, this is Santa, and ultimately he does want the kids to get presents. Why can't we end with, like, him holding a single present for dear life, and, like, there's some hope that he can sell that and have a better life or something like that. I'm wondering why it has to end on just sadness and emptiness, you know what I mean? Because, and again, like, I'm the kind of person who likes hope. I like having there be hope in my stories, even when there's darkness. And so again, this might just be, well, that's how Kaylee would have written it. That's what Kaylee likes, but it's not what Azo and Nightwolf wrote, nor what they like, you know. It just, summary, it just all of this comes back to the question of why. And even if the only answer is, I don't know, we wanted fun horror vibes, that's perfectly fine as an answer. But there are a lot of things both inside the story and just looking outside the story that leave me with that question. Maybe he sees it as horrifying because he hasn't been a good boy. That's interesting. That is an interesting idea. But also, like, the poor boy doesn't have parents or a home. So it's not like he's purposely being like, hey, I'm gonna be a naughty boy. I'm gonna go smash the windows. It's like he needs money for food, and so he's gonna take that job, you know? So that's extra sad if Santa's like, you're a bad boy, Jacob, because you don't have any other choice. Because you can't be a good boy. Too bad. Yeah, Jacob hasn't been a good boy, but it'd be neat if he got a small present that he wanted, yeah. Oh, this is a small thing, but I think a lot of people covered a lot of the other small things, and I don't recall this one being covered, so I'll talk about it. The street is too pretty to have bars on its windows. That reads to me that it does have bars on its windows. Like, the street has bars on its windows, but it's too pretty for that, right? I'm trying to figure out how to describe. It's just that phrasing. That phrasing to me means, yeah, like, I don't know. I'm trying to think of an example, like, you're too pretty to be into wrestling. Something like that. It's like, this person is into wrestling, but somebody's, like, judging them and being like, ha, you're too pretty for that stuff. It's like, it's what I'm into, man. It doesn't matter how pretty I am. I like the wrestling. But like that is saying, they are into it. And so, like, it's too pretty to have bars on its windows is saying, it does have bars on its windows, it's just too pretty for that. But reading on, that's not what you're trying to say. You're trying to say, it doesn't have bars on its windows. And so I think saying something like, it's rare for Jacob to walk down a street without bars on its windows. Or, this street is very pretty, you know, no bars on the windows, or something like that. I think I have gone over it, mostly, though. I don't want to spend too much time on this one, but very good story. Even though it leaves me with questions, I did enjoy your vibes. I do think you did a great job with this Christmas horror and writing a story with really just one single character and very little dialogue. I think you did a great job with it. Thank you so much for submitting, and I hope that you enjoyed your partnership. I hope you enjoyed writing a story together.